Kelly said, third generation at where we're at now. My family actually came from over from England. And two brothers did and landed in Ellis Island in the early days. One went north, one went south. The farming side of us went south into Virginia, then on down into Alabama, then to Texas, down in Fairfield County, Texas, Freestone County, and then up to southwest Oklahoma, and that's where my great-granddad settled, in southwest Oklahoma, about 100 miles south of where I'm at. They had 16 boys and girls in their family, and about when they were 8, 9 of them got old enough to get out on their own, great-granddad decided that they didn't have enough land and they weren't going to have enough land there, so he loaded up 3 of the boys and 2 of the girls and headed out. And that was in 1926, and they came to the family farm, and my granddad said, "This is the place I want." It was up for rent, and so granddad had enough money for rent for a couple of years and give his son a little bit more money to live on, and said, "Adios, we're heading to California." And Uncle Marvin then, by the way, that they had so many kids, and my granddad's name was Marvin Curtis. His younger brother was named Marvin as well, and so they called my granddad Curtis. I always said they had so many kids they run out of names. And so Uncle Marvin landed in South LA, California, and had a family farm there. And Uncle Baskin went up into Washington State, had an apple orchard, and his family's still there. The girls never found any boys they liked from California back to home, and so Granddad took them to Oklahoma City and said, "Get a job and find a man, and you're on your own." And he's back to the farm to try to finish raising the rest of the kids. So the third generation here on the farm. We've grown quite a bit over the years. Like I said, we got a couple thousand acres of farm ground. We used to grow mainly alfalfa and cotton and wheat when I grew up, and we were heavy tillage operations back in them days. And really, and most of the country was that way. The more you plowed, the more you made. And you know, we didn't understand what we were doing. I have said all along that people never did intend to destroy the land or degrade it. They were doing the best they could do, but now we know better, and we can do a lot better. So in about 1994, I decided that we should start no-tilling, zero-tilling. And that wasn't very popular with Granddad or my dad, but Ginger and I were starting out, and we rented a farm and was purchasing some land as well. And so I started that, and we were pretty successful for a while, but I still was trying to take too much and not leave enough residue and enough to feed the biology, and I didn't know that then. I've learned a lot, and but we continued until I heard Dave Brandt in about 2009, and David from Carroll, Ohio, really inspired me of what he'd been able to do with cover crops. And so I came home and decided, you know, this is what I want to try. I want to do cover crops and this new thing called soil health, you know. And so we started, and I wanted to do it right, and I knew I had to have some help. Kevin and I talked about this, and we've been traveling. It's very important to have a mentor or someone that's willing to share the burden with you. And so I was on the Conservation District Board in the States. That's big. Locally led conservation, and most of the board members are farmers. My board was all in, the state association was, as well as the Natural Resource Conservation Service for the government, and Noble Research. And so I knew they would help me prove it and help me keep records and really watch what we were doing. And so it's been a great journey, and we've come a long way since 2010. And by the way, we started in 2010, and the drought of 11 and 12 came along, much like you guys had last year. Very, very, very hard to live through. We had 6 inches of rain in 11, and we had about 9 inches in 12. And everybody always asks me, you know, well, how much rainfall do you normally get? They say we have an average of around 18 to 20 inches. That literally can be, give or take, 18 or 20 inches, and you guys know that as well as I do. Because in 2014, we had 25.4 the month of May alone. And so we went from an extreme drought to extreme wet period. Now we're back in the drought again, and we'll probably be in this one a little bit longer. So as we progress through the years, we started having field days. And by the way, this is one of our field days here. We grow a lot of summer cover crops to graze. Our mentality on the crops we grow is if we're going to have a grain crop, that's normally plan A. But I really don't grow anything that plan B can't be run through a cow or some type of animal. And so if we have a disaster like this year, our grain sorghum's not going to head, a lot of our summer crops are not going to make it, well, at least we can graze them. And we've cut down on our hay over the last several years to we're about on half of where we used to be, and I want to be half that again. My wife, Ginger, is really the cow person, runs and manages the herd. I travel a lot. Around 200 days a year I'm on the road doing things like this. And so I have one hired hand and my wife to run the operation. And so we're pretty efficient on workforce and labor. She really likes unrolling hay out for the cattle in the wintertime, and it's been hard to get her convinced that we can stockpile forage and feed them more economically than we can feed hay. And she knows that now. But once again, the greatest obstacle that we have in soil health and regenerating is in between these 2 years here is the big obstacle. And that was the obstacle for me early on, was proving that we could grow summer forage in between our cash grain crops. Neighbors and friends told me, you're crazy. You're literally crazy. And I said, well, I've been crazy all my life. It's, because you can't grow that because we don't have enough rainfall to grow one crop. And lo and behold, they were right. And why they were right, it took me a few years to figure this out, was when we started, the NRCS wanted to measure our water infiltration rates. And most everyone in the state of Oklahoma is a ½ inch or below in infiltration rates per hour because of tillage or poor range management. But we thought that's the way it was. Just naturally accepted it. That's the reason we couldn't grow, because we were wasting too much water out of our fields. And so we've done a lot to improve that. I'll get into more of that after lunch.
Are you in the red dirt area?
So we're going to talk more about that this afternoon. Yes, Oklahoma's known for the red dirt, and I am in some of the red hills, not quite as far west as some of them. The funny thing about the red dirt areas, the reason it's red is because iron is the only thing that you cannot wash or blow out of the soil. So it wasn't always red, and we've been able to change a lot of our red land back to darker carbon soil, and I'll show you some slides and we'll talk more about that change. Kevin gives me a hard time about the change that we went through and the ruckus I stirred up over that. But, so as we started raising our infiltration rates and stuff, we quickly learned that we could grow a lot like this, and we could put $150, $200 per acre in our pocket off of grazing in the summertime, and add to our cash flow and add to our bottom line. And really our net profit really started going up as we started doing that. And it's ag is a tough enterprise to make money. It always has been. It probably always will be. There's always challenges, whether it's weather or markets. And we don't have control over any of that. But one thing we have, it's not really control, but management over, is our land and how we take care of that and how it can provide for us. We do have control over it. We can destroy it and gripe about it, or we can rebuild it and let it function the way it's supposed to. And if we do that, then we have the optimum chance of making the money and surviving. And that's the key, is understanding that ecosystems and how that really can flourish and help us lower our inputs. You know, in the beginning, my great-granddad and my granddad never fertilized and never sprayed a weed that I know of. Now, my dad started fertilizing in the late 50s and early 60s, and things were better. And you know, that started that trend. And then we kind of turned into morons. And it was the more we put on, the more we needed, and the more on, the better it was. And we didn't understand as we was doing that how we were destroying the microbiology under our feet and the consequences of what that meant. And we still don't know the full ramifications of that. We've learned a lot what's below the ground and different species and what they do. But they were all created to help us and to mineralize the nutrients, make them available for us, and we've about taken them out of the equation. But the good thing is we can redo that and we can rebuild that. And
So what was
that's
happening?
why I do what I do.
What was happening on your farm during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s? Was your family plowing it up then?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all they knew. And
Because that was one of the worst areas, wasn't it?
yep, it was. And actually, you know, the truth, if you look in Oklahoma history, we lost more soil to water erosion during the 30s than we did to wind erosion. Because what happens in a drought is normally you'll have a big weather event to either bust a drought, or during there there'll be localized showers. Well, it was all flowered up from heavy tillage and blowing, and so when it did rain, I mean, tons. Now, Lincoln County in central Oklahoma is the #1 county for soil loss ever recorded. And so the 30s were extremely hard. The thing about my granddad, he was very conservation orientated. Even though he was plowing, he knew what water and wind could do. And he even planted clovers and different cover crops back in the day. Of course, they turned them under as green manure, green foliage. In 1928, my granddad decided there was a creek that come out of the pastures and went across the farm ground to the Canadian River, and it would just spread out and scatter across there. And so he took a walking plow and started making a ditch straight to the river to divert the water to that. That worked very good until 1934, and they had a big rain event of about 15 to 16 inches. And overnight, that small ditch washed out and made a creek of it's about 40 foot wide, about 25 foot deep overnight. And that changed my granddad. It really did. And he was really then all about managing water, managing soil. And so that's where I got my influence early on. But still, I can remember in the 60s, the rivers and the creeks got out. We had another big rainfall event. My dad had everything plowed, and it just sheared all the loose soil on top off down to the plow layer. And my dad said, I don't know what we're going to do, but we can't do this ever again. And so then we started managing residue better. But we were cattlemen also, and anything sticking up that was green was forage.
Yeah.
And you know, put money in your pocket and take that forage. Now we take half and leave half. And we feed the biology, keep that land armored. And when we get back from the soil pits and stuff at lunch, I'm going to show you a video here. One of the things that we really learned a lot, and Noble Research, a good friend of mine, Jim Johnson, I met down there. We've been working together for about 12 years. And Jim kept telling me, he said, we need to watch the cows graze. Because we need to know if we're going to plant, and this is a 15-way mix, by the way, we need to know how they're going to graze that and how they're going to select what they graze. And so we'd go out and we would walk along, try to catch a cow grazing, and normally she just turned away from us and she just keep her grazing like, oh, I'm not gonna let you watch what I'm eating. And I asked Jim one day, I said, what if we could put a camera, a GoPro camera on this one of these cows and watch her graze? And so their team out in Noble went to work, and we made a collar and we mounted, and I'm not going to show you the video right now. It's kind of a teaser for during lunch. But we learned so much. She kept the collar on about 4.5 hours grazing that afternoon. And then we condensed that down to about a 3-minute video for you guys to watch. And it's the #1 video in the country. Right now I think we're at almost 1 million views across the country. As far as regenerative videos, I'll put it that way. But what we really learned, they're just like us. They know what they like, and they know what they don't like. And if they taste, and I get a lot of questions, you know, how do you graze forage sorghums and stuff in a drought? If it's stressed, is it high in nitrates? Is it high in prussic acid? And they can be. The key is, if you have enough diversity in that mix, there's a lot of it that's not. And what we found is them cows and calves will not graze something that tastes bad. And if it's high in nitrates or high in prussic acid, they know that the very first nibble, and sometimes the very first smell. The problem is when you only have a monocrop of that, and that's all they have to eat. And they're like us. If Kelly locks the door here, and all we have is 1 or 2 sandwiches to eat today, between us all, guess what we're going to do? We're going to eat whatever it is. So the video will show how they select it, and I really couldn't have directed this heifer any better. It's quite interesting. How many of you have ever saw that video that I have out? Okay, well, cool. Kevin's probably saw it. But we'll show that during lunch. One of the things that I'll quickly talk about, there's electric polywire right here going across. This is one of our big field days that we had. I think there's almost 200 people there that day. And I told them I was going to demonstrate how we put out a polywire and how we roll it up. And we were out at a dairy yesterday, and they were doing great grazing and had polywires out. And I showed him a video how we rigged up a 4-wheeler with carry our spools, our wire, and our post on it. And then I use a cordless drill to roll them polywire up. So I was going to demonstrate that day how I could put out about a 1/4 mile of polywire, move the cattle, and roll up the old wire and time that. And we were able to do that in about 18 minutes. And that's not hurrying along. I mean, that's, you know, you're busy. But I got real worried when we unloaded the buses. I told everybody, I said, hold down your talking as best you can, because my cows never had 200 people staring at them. Little did I know they were going to all get out of the bus and line up on the fence right where I was going to take the polywire down and move the cows. But it's amazing when you get cows trained to that. They're just like us. At lunchtime, when Kelly and them put out lunch and they say it's ready, you know what everybody's going to do? Right over there. And if there's any obstacles, we're just going to walk around that and go right in there. So them cows and calves that day walked right through the polywire in front of everybody, and they were talking. They weren't loud, and never scared them. And in 18 minutes, we open that up, we pull the wire up and put the wire out. And so it wasn't that way to start with. We done it by hand, and it was a learning curve. And then when we knew that's a way to do things, and we were better, we were getting more forage, the gains were better on the cattle, and we actually finished beef that way as well, and we do multiple moves if we're going to do that. So we learned a lot, And so this afternoon, I'm going to talk for a while, maybe a couple of different presentations here. Kevin wants me to talk about our double crop corn and how we raise corn as a double crop and how we graze that as well, and I can do that. And then I've got another one that I might get into, depending on time. We won't try to wrap up and get you guys ladies back to the farm in a reasonable time. So with that, Kelly, I think we take a few questions, then head to the pit. All right. We're going to go to the farm. I guess we got a pit or two dug, and we'll look in that and work there, and then we'll come back and eat lunch. Thanks the plan. Anybody got any questions before we head out?
You said about doing less and less hay. Is that because you prefer your cows grazing and it's less labor, or do you feel there's something inherently bad from a soil health point of view about for dry hay production?
So it's multiple things, and it's the expense of putting up hay, as you know, is when originally round baler come out and the cost of equipment, it was very efficient. Less labor intensive than small square bales. I grew up on small square bales. Nowadays it's very, very expensive. Balers are $50,000, $60,000 if you buy a new one. You know, a good one, used one's 30 something. So it's very expensive. From a soil health aspect, if you haul that out of the field to another place and feed it, the haul off of the nutrients can be very costly. And we've done a study in Kansas on a failed corn crop here lately. And so we went in and measured the biomass of that corn, and the cover crop that was in there, had that analyzed for nutrients. And because the neighbor was wanting to cut it for silage or cut it for hay and haul it to their farm, that's about $700 in today's market per acre of nutrients. If that person decided to sell that or hay that, haul it off. And of course, the guy that was wanting to do that said, well, I can't pay that. And he said, well, I understand that. And this producer was really torn because he's wanting to help his neighbors out. But he also hated to give up $700 an acre that he knew he would have to replace or rebuild. And so that's another thing. It's natural for cattle to graze. We talked yesterday at your place about windrow grazing or standing forage grazing through the winter. A very good way. A lot of people up here graze corn. That's a good way to manage that. There's different ways to do that. Like I said, sloth grazing is a good way. It depends on your location and your weather. As we talked out in your field yesterday, at home, I like it standing so I can catch snow. But then there are times that we have icy snow where it melts and freezes, and then it doesn't work very well for a few days because of the ice. And we have a lot of ice storms. And so sometimes windrow grazing, sloth grazing would work better for us. And we have done a lot of that. So it's multiple things. We want to cut out the expense because the way to make money is not to spend too much money. And as a country, we've been very good at spending money and buying new equipment. And I've had my share of nice equipment over the years, don't get me wrong. But I quickly learned that depreciation of that asset sometimes is not the best financial thing to do. And so we've really kind of shrunk our operation down now. I do have a slother and I do have a baler, and we do have to put up some hay for them weather events that may be heavy snow, heavy ice. So we have to have some insurance to do that. I know a lot of guys that never put up a bale of hay. And Noble Research is on that right now, but they're 200 more miles south of me. And so they have a little bit more flexibility in their winter than I do versus we're maybe here, you know, because we know winters can be pretty bad. So it's multiple things that the reason we want to get away from that, because the cost of putting it up, the cost of the loss of nutrients. Now if we bale graze, unroll hay back where we hayed it from, You know, we don't haul the nutrients off, and that, you can do that. And then like, well, if we're gonna feed it where we put it up, we're just supposed to stockpile it and let the cows swath and bale it, and cut that expense out. And so that's the things that we look at and how we determine that. Right now in the drought, a lot of people are feeding hay, and that's not the way to survive at the cost of hay and the feed from now till next spring. That, you know, the cost will not allow you to do that, but a lot of guys try that. We haven't fed a bale of hay yet, and we won't feed a bale of hay. I am selling some older cows now. We sold, and we've updated since that buy. We normally run about 350 to 400 cows, but in 2018 we had a big wildfire and we got burned out. We lost 26 miles of fence, some barns and some equipment, and so we culled the herd down, and we've just been slowly building back. But we're selling old cows right now, and we're keeping the weaning calves because we want to breed them heifers. When we come out of this drought, we think there'll be a market opportunity, and we need to replace some. But we are grinding a little hay and some grain supplement in calves right now because our green growth of our forages is really struggling with the drought. So we are feeding a little hay that way. But that's all square bales and the grinder mixer. But there's a lot of different ways to feed animals. And we think the natural way is let them graze. Try to grow, like you're growing multiple species, different things for them to graze on. Just like lunch is going to be, I'm sure it's not just a piece of bologna or a piece of bread or a piece of cheese. You know, we're going to have multiple things to graze on.
The hay thing is something I've always struggled with because I don't have cows of my own.
Right.
And growing hay ticks off so many boxes on the list of soil health things. You got diversity, you got way fewer synthetic inputs,
Yep.
you have no tillage.
Yep.
But it's that, and if you, like for us, it's a one cut thing.
Sure.
So by most years, by the first week of July, it's done.
Right.
And I've reset the photosynthesis to all
Sure.
go over again and
Yep.
put carbon in the soil.
Well, it's all about management. I grew up, like I said, selling dairy hay, and we had 800 acres hay most of the years for a lot of years, alfalfa. We grew a lot of summer forages for hay, and but we just learned how to manage that better now. And there's nothing wrong with selling hay as a commodity. You just got to understand the cost of the haul off. And how important cutting a little extra high. I know it's yesterday.
Well, that makes,
you know,
night and day.
I grew up, we wanted to cut, you know, not the top of the crown of the alfalfa off, but about a quarter inch above that, because it was tonnage. And like Kevin and I talked yesterday, you know, that's the crappy side of the nutrients of the hay is down here. It up here is where you, and so cutting it up a little high really doesn't hurt you other than a little tonnage. And it'll really help you down the road as that regrowth and that photosynthesis can start much quicker instead of being shut completely down.
It's like so many things. It's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it.
The one thing you got to remember about soil health is that everything we do on the land has a consequence, has an impact. The key is figuring out how to lessen that to the most that we can, and try to make that consequence a good outcome versus a bad outcome, and to lessen the footprint is what I would say is the key to figuring it out, because photosynthesis is the life of the soil. And if you want to kill soil, bare it and leave it fallow, and you will kill everything, you starve it all out and it shuts down. And then it will not make you nutrients and it will not function right. And as we saw in some of the soils that we dug yesterday, them thin little plates that looks down through the soil, that is where the microbiology has ate the carbon out of the aggregate and it has actually just collapsed on itself. That's from not feeding it enough. So when you feed it enough and then you keep it alive, it should look like a chocolate cake mix. It should just crumble in your hands and have big aggregation in it. When everything's perfect. And it's hard to be perfect all the time. You know, but that doesn't mean that our goal shouldn't be to try to be there as much as we can.
Well, and that's one of the other big boxes that it ticks is with frame forage, is it's a year-long living root.
Right, right. And the thing that we've really learned, and I saw a lot of silage from driving up from Oklahoma to Colorado and speaking the other day, and I hopped on a plane and flew into Edmonton and we've been driving around. You know, across the country, a lot of people put up silage, and that's a good form of feed. But we've got off on this corn silage a lot with high starch. And what a really good diverse mix can do for your silage is really unbelievable in nutrients for the animals that you're feeding. So, you know, we've took a diverse prairie that no matter where you, from here to the ocean south, and west and east and north, no matter where you go, a minimum of 100 species to 500 or 600 species was grown at one time, depending on the size of the plots you measure. But I've been in some places on a ranch that's identified 500 different things growing on their ranch. We've taken that and tried to force a mono system into it. It was never designed for one. Nowhere have I been, and I've been all over the United States, up here, overseas. I haven't been to Australia yet, I'm going, but nowhere have I been that I've ever been able to find just one thing growing, naturally. Forcing that into Mother Nature is very difficult because she pushes back. And how she pushes back is with weeds, because she wants it covered. And I've learned also over the years, a weed, I have very few weeds that I consider a detrimental weed to me. There's a lot of weeds that are great forage, and I've grazed a lot of weeds this summer with cows and calves, very profitable if you manage them right. So that's the things that we got to look at with soil health, is how that we've taken a functioning living system that was very fine by itself, regenerating itself, growing all the time, and forced into plowing it and forcing a monocrop system, where it be corn, beans, whatever, cotton, alfalfa, whatever you're growing, and the pushback that it pushed on us, and we try to kill the weed. And you know, I've had a lot of no-till guys this summer said, well, we can't afford chemicals anymore, we're going to go back to plowing to get rid of the weeds. And I said, well, good luck with that, because if a plow could get rid of weed, we wouldn't have weeds over 100 years. Same way with the chemical. Mother Nature can figure out, okay, you can make a chemical kill me this year, but one or two of us is going to survive, and then the next year there's 8 or 10 of us, then there's 1,000 of us, then there's 500,000 of us, and pretty soon that chemical don't work, and that's Mother Nature pushing back. Because she's going to win out. She's going to cover it one way or the other. It's just trying to figure all that out is the hard part and the fun part.
And what was your grazing saying that you shared with us last night?
Oh, take half and leave see, what was that? Take half and,
Will was,
Let me think on that for a minute, it'll come back to me.
I know you'll be blessed as the end of it.
Yeah.
take half and leave the rest to be blessed, is what I say. And you really will. The harder you, the more you take, the harder it is to recover. And the longer you do that, the more it is. And that's the reason we have so much red dirt, is the plow and the overgrazing.
I've seen some big ravines in southern Oklahoma, and I rode down in them, and there's just huge gullies, and then they're growing up with these big trees, and I wondered, how in the hell these gullies get there? But now
Yep.
it makes sense, right?
Right. So, and that's one, I'll quit on this final comment. If you really read Lewis and Clark's journals, traveling through here, south of here, in the States, and even down in my area, I have a journal. So they had the Chisholm Trail that come up Highway 81 in Oklahoma, come up into Kansas, where the great cattle trails from Texas. As settlement moved west in Kansas, they moved west about 80 miles to 100 miles and had the Great Western Cattle Trail. That comes through our property. So in 1876, there was a drover that left San Antonio, and I'm so thankful, he kept a daily journal. And he had 9,000 head, 3 herds of 3,000 apiece, and they drove them from San Antonio, Texas to Ogallala, Nebraska. So every day he wrote down something. Some days he might write 2 paragraphs or 3, and some days maybe a page or 2. And he done that several times, and then he moved to New Mexico and was a land assessor out there. And his grandchildren found this journal, and they published it. One of the things, if you read them old journals like that, when they crossed them rivers and ravines, they were gently sloped. They may be running a lot of water that they have to float the wagon across or swim the cattle across. But very, very seldom you find a journal that said it was a deep ravine cut and they had to lower the wagons off the side down into the river and all. That came after settlement and the plow and the screwing up of the water infiltration, so that we had lots of erosion and lots of cutting happened in. And that's what's happened to our creeks and our streams and our rivers in the States and all over the world, how they cut out. That wasn't designed that way. So if you read them, that you'll find that terrain was so much different, and how we've changed that in 200 years is really eye-opening, the amount of soil. In the United States, our #1 export is soil. And NRCS is measured over the last few years, and the last one was in 2017, about 1.69 billion tons a year in erosion to the Gulf.
Down in Mississippi.
Billion. Yeah. Yeah. So that's just unacceptable. There's no reason for us to do that. So let's go enjoy the pits.
So if you guys want to carpool or try to take as least vehicles as possible, but